The room erupted into applause as the woman stepped onto the mat. She wore a black belt around her waist, a gold medal hanging from her neck, and a smile stretched across her face that said she had already won before the first move was made. Then she turned and pointed directly at Victoria. "Why don't you stop hiding behind those expensive clothes?" she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And fight someone your own size?" The crowd laughed. Victoria's husband laughed louder than anyone in the room. And in that single moment, surrounded by flashing cameras, clinking champagne glasses, and the sound of people who were supposed to respect her now mocking her openly, Victoria Hale made a decision that would change every life in that building before sunrise. What none of them knew was that before Victoria built companies, before she wore designer dresses, before anyone called her successful or powerful or untouchable, she had spent years deep inside a world most people never see. A world of military contracts, combat instruction, psychological resilience, elite tactical training. She had shaped some of the most disciplined and dangerous operators on Earth. She had tried to leave that life behind. She had chosen peace. She had chosen love. And now the two people who had spent months systematically destroying everything she had built were standing in front of her, laughing into her face, with a room full of witnesses watching every second. Victoria slowly set down the glass they had just knocked from her hand. She looked at the mat. She looked at the woman with the black belt. Then she said one word. "Fine." Nobody in that room understood what they had just unleashed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now let us go back to the beginning. Because to understand what happened that night, you first need to understand who Victoria Hale really was. And why the two people who thought they had already destroyed her had no idea they had been walking toward their own collapse the entire time. Victoria did not grow up believing life would be easy. She grew up believing that difficulty was simply the price of becoming someone worth respecting. From a young age, she was disciplined, focused, and deeply aware that the world rarely rewards softness. She studied hard. She worked harder. She pushed herself in ways that most people around her never understood. By her mid-20s, she had built something rare. A reputation inside a world that does not advertise itself. A world of military instruction, combat psychology, and elite physical conditioning. She was not a soldier herself. She was something different. A trainer, a tactician, a specialist in teaching highly skilled operators how to survive, how to adapt, and how to maintain control when every instinct is screaming at them to fall apart. She worked with men and women who carried the weight of missions the public would never hear about. She taught them how to move without being seen, how to read a room before the danger shows itself, how to neutralize a threat with the smallest amount of energy and the highest amount of precision. She was relentless, patient, technically brilliant, and among the circles that knew her, she was spoken about with the kind of quiet reverence that is far more meaningful than applause. Then an injury changed everything. It happened during a training exercise. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just a moment where the body reached its limit and the damage was severe enough to force a long, painful recovery. During those months of healing, something shifted inside Victoria. The relentless energy she had poured into that world began searching for somewhere else to go. She began to ask questions she had never given herself time to ask before. Questions about what she actually wanted. About who she was outside the training mat, outside the contracts, outside the discipline. She wanted something quieter. Something warmer. She wanted to build something she could call her own in a different way. So she transitioned. Slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. She took the same strategic intelligence she had applied to tactical training and began applying it to business. Her network was extensive. Her ability to read people was extraordinary. Her tolerance for pressure was completely abnormal. Within a few years, she had built a company that was growing faster than anyone around her had anticipated. And then she met Daniel. He came into her life at a moment when she was finally beginning to exhale. He was charming, ambitious, and seemingly sincere in a way that caught her off guard. He talked about his dreams with a kind of raw hunger that she recognized from the operators she used to train. That specific combination of fire and direction. She respected it. "You actually believe you can build something real," she told him during one of their early conversations. "I do," he said, "but I'm missing pieces I don't have yet." "What kind of pieces?" He smiled at her in a way that made her stomach tighten. "The right ones." She invested in him. Not just financially, though that came too. She invested her time, her contacts, her reputation. She opened doors that would have remained closed to him for years without her. She introduced him to partners who trusted her judgment. She worked beside him through the painful early stages when a business is nothing but stress and uncertainty and the constant threat of collapse. And together they built something significant. Daniel became successful. Genuinely, measurably successful. The kind of man who walked into rooms and got noticed. The kind of man who received invitations to events he would never have heard about 5 years earlier. But success did something to Daniel that Victoria had seen happen to people before. It convinced him that he had earned everything alone. The gratitude that used to soften his eyes when he looked at her slowly disappeared. It was replaced first by comfort, then by distance, then by something that felt a great deal like contempt. He stopped asking her opinion on major decisions. He stopped acknowledging her contributions in rooms where acknowledgement mattered. He began speaking to her in a tone that suggested she was an obstacle to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. Victoria noticed. She said nothing at first. She was patient by nature and by training. She watched. She observed. She gave him time to find his way back to who he used to be. He never did. Then came Sabrina. Sabrina Cole was a celebrated martial arts competitor. Young, physically extraordinary, and completely magnetic in the way that certain people are when they know exactly the kind of attention they generate simply by entering a space. She and Daniel met at a corporate athletic event, and within weeks their connection had become something Victoria could no longer ignore. At first it was the small signs. The phone that suddenly needed to be face down on every table. The schedule that developed gaps that were never fully explained. The sudden attention to appearance that had nothing to do with Victoria. Then came the unmistakable signs. The kind a person with Victoria's perceptiveness cannot rationalize away no matter how much she might want to. She said nothing. Still, she continued watching. Because in her experience, the person who moves first without complete information rarely wins. And then she found the financial irregularities. It started with a single transaction that did not align with the quarterly reports. She examined it more carefully and found another. Then another. Then a pattern so deliberate, so methodical, that it could not be accidental. Money was being moved. Assets were being repositioned. Shares in the most profitable divisions were being quietly transferred into holding structures she had never seen before. Someone had been working systematically for months to reroute the wealth that both of them had built together into structures where only one name would appear. His name. She confronted him on a Tuesday evening. Quietly, directly, without drama. "Daniel," she said, sitting across from him at the dining table where they had eaten hundreds of meals together. "I need you to explain what's happening with the financials." He did not flinch. He did not deny it. He did not even pretend to look surprised. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, and said something that cracked something permanent inside her chest. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that." "Have you?" "I'm filing for divorce, Victoria." The silence that followed felt like the inside of a held breath. "I see," she said finally. "Sabrina and I are serious. I know you probably think this is just something temporary, but it isn't. She's different. He paused, searching for the word. "She's exciting. She understands who I am now. Not who I used to be." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "And the money?" He had the audacity to shrug. "The business grew under my direction. My relationships. My decisions. The businesses I funded," she said quietly. "With the contacts I built. With the reputation I spent 15 years earning before you ever heard my name." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." "I'm not making anything," she said. "I'm simply identifying what's true." He stood up, and then, as if he needed her to understand the full weight of his contempt, he said something she would never forget. "You've become irrelevant, Victoria. You used to be intimidating. Now you're just comfortable. Nobody fears someone comfortable." He walked out of the room. Victoria sat at that table alone for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and made the first of several calls that would take months to fully unfold. If you are still watching up to this point, type, "I'm still here" in the comment section. This story is only getting deeper. The investigation she launched was silent, surgical, and comprehensive. She assembled a team that mirrored the kind of operational precision she had once taught as a profession. Forensic accountants who could trace financial structures through layers of corporate architecture. Corporate investigators with experience in exactly the kind of asset concealment she was seeing. Attorneys who had dismantled fraudulent business arrangements far more complex than this one. And 2 former intelligence specialists she had worked with during her years in military contracting, both of whom owed her debts they had never found the right opportunity to repay. They worked quietly. No confrontations. No warnings. No signals that anything was in motion. Because Victoria understood something that most people who find themselves betrayed never fully grasp. The most dangerous response to betrayal is not the immediate one. It is the patient one. While the investigation progressed, Sabrina began a coordinated public campaign against Victoria. It was subtle at first. Comment here. A dismissive reference there. The kind of social erosion that is difficult to point at directly but is felt by everyone in the surrounding environment. Sabrina spread stories through mutual acquaintances about Victoria being unstable, about her being difficult, about her clinging to a marriage that Daniel had outgrown. She curated a social media presence that positioned herself as everything Victoria was not. Young, competitive, vital, physically dominant. Former friends began keeping their distance. Invitations slowed. The social architecture that Victoria had helped construct over years of relationship building began quietly realigning itself around Daniel and Sabrina. Victoria watched all of it. She never reacted. She never posted responses. Never sent messages. Never pulled people aside to defend herself. She simply continued doing what she had always done. Working. Thinking. Moving with patience through a process most people would have abandoned for the immediate relief of a public confrontation. Her silence frustrated them deeply. "Why isn't she saying anything?" Sabrina reportedly complained to Daniel. "She's just sitting there. It's weird. Normal people react." Daniel's response, which found its way back to Victoria through channels neither of them knew existed, revealed more about him than anything he had ever said to her directly. "She's just broken," he said. "She doesn't have anything left to fight with." He believed that. He genuinely believed it. That particular piece of information told Victoria everything she needed to know about timing. The charity event was one of the most anticipated gatherings of that particular season. A formal fundraising evening that brought together significant business figures, philanthropists, and public personalities. Both Victoria and Daniel were patrons of the charity. Both had been on the guest list long before their personal situation deteriorated. Neither withdrew. Victoria arrived alone. She wore a deep burgundy dress that she had owned for 3 years and had never found the occasion for. She looked, by every account from people who were present that evening, impossibly composed. Several people who approached her in those early hours of the event later described a quality to her stillness that was difficult to articulate. Not coldness. Not sadness. Something more like a person who already knows exactly how the evening ends. Daniel and Sabrina arrived together 40 minutes later. They made an entrance designed to be noticed. Sabrina wore a fitted athletic formal dress that showcased the physical conditioning she was known for. She wore her competition medals on a decorative sash. She carried herself with the specific confidence of someone who has been told she is dominant in a room so many times that she has stopped waiting for confirmation. The moment she spotted Victoria, something shifted in her expression. Whatever she had expected to see, it was not what she saw. She expected discomfort, deflation, the visible marks of a woman who had been slowly unmade. What she saw instead was a woman standing comfortably in her own stillness, talking to two older gentlemen with the relaxed ease of someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing to prove. That gap between expectation and reality did something to Sabrina. It irritated her in a way that was visible if you were paying close attention. As the evening progressed, Sabrina moved through the space in a way that ensured she and Victoria would interact. The slight shoulder turn as she passed. The comment delivered just loud enough. The smile that carried something sharp inside it. Then, midway through the evening, an open area of the venue became an impromptu martial arts exhibition space. Several of the guests were connected to a sports philanthropy initiative, and a demonstration had been arranged. Sabrina was in her element. She moved through a series of techniques with the kind of fluid power that comes from genuine mastery. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. And then she turned to Victoria. "Why don't you stop hiding behind those expensive clothes?" she said, projecting her voice so the full room could hear. "And fight someone your own size?" Laughter broke through the crowd like a wave. Daniel laughed, loud, unself-conscious. The laugh of a man who wanted everyone in the room to understand exactly whose side he was on. Victoria did not laugh. She did not flinch. She held Sabrina's gaze with an expression that several witnesses later struggled to describe. Not anger, not humiliation, something quieter and considerably more unsettling. "I'm not interested," Victoria said simply. More laughter, more comments. The crowd feeding on the energy of public humiliation the way crowds sometimes do when the person being humiliated seems too dignified to defend themselves. Daniel stepped forward. "She's scared," he said, performing for the audience now, giving them what they wanted. "My wife has always been better at running from things than facing them." Several people shifted uncomfortably. It was one thing to enjoy a competitive exchange. It was something else to watch a man publicly degrade his wife. But nobody intervened. Sabrina took one step toward Victoria, and then she knocked the glass directly out of Victoria's hand. The sound of it hitting the floor cut through the room like a blade. Complete silence. Victoria looked down at the glass. Then she looked up, slowly at Sabrina, and then at Daniel, and then back at Sabrina. Something moved behind Victoria's eyes. Not rage, not distress. Something entirely different. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition of a person who has been waiting for a specific signal and has finally received it. "Fine," she said. It was one word. But the man who heard it first, a retired military commander sitting 6 feet away who had turned to look at Victoria the moment Sabrina stepped toward her, went completely still. He had recognized her the moment she walked into the room. He had been watching her all evening with the specific alertness of someone who understood something about her that nobody else in the room did. When she said that word, the color left his face. The person next to him noticed and leaned in. "What's wrong?" He spoke quietly, but his voice carried. "I know who she is," he said. "I know what she can do." "Who is she?" He shook his head slowly. "That woman spent years training people who protected nations. I watched her dismantle 2 instructors simultaneously in a demonstration exercise. She wasn't even breathing hard afterward." He paused. "These people have made a catastrophic mistake." The mat was prepared. The phones were raised. The cameras were recording. Sabrina rolled her neck, bounced lightly on the balls of her feet, and smiled at the audience with the complete confidence of a decorated champion who has never lost a public engagement. She had defeated opponents far more experienced than a retired businesswoman in a designer dress. She had medals. She had titles. She had a crowd already on her side. Victoria removed her heels. She set them aside neatly. She did nothing else to prepare. Someone in the crowd made a joke about that. Victoria did not respond. Sabrina moved first. Fast. Sharp. A combination of kicks and strikes that were technically excellent and visually impressive. The crowd responded instinctively, the way crowds respond to speed and aggression. Victoria was not there. Not in the place Sabrina had aimed for. She had moved in a way that was so economical, so absent of any wasted motion, that several observers would later say it looked impossible. Like watching a doorway that suddenly wasn't where the wind expected it to be. Sabrina adjusted, attacked again. More aggressive this time, more committed. Victoria stepped aside, again, and again, each time with the same unhurried, almost bored precision of someone who has seen every version of this particular kind of attack so many thousands of times that responding to it requires no more concentration than breathing. Sabrina's composure began fracturing. "Stop moving," she snapped. It was a mistake, not a physical one, a psychological one, because it told Victoria and everyone else watching that Sabrina had already left her own game plan and entered Victoria's. "Come on then," Sabrina said, louder now. Arms out, inviting. Victoria moved. What followed lasted approximately 30 seconds. Nobody in the room could fully explain it afterward because it happened with a speed and precision that the eye processes but cannot quite track. One moment Sabrina was standing. Then there was a redirection that seemed to use Sabrina's own momentum as the primary instrument. Controlled sweep. A joint lock applied with the exact amount of pressure required to neutralize without injury. Sabrina was on the mat. She was not hurt, but she was completely controlled. She could not move. The room did not react immediately. There was a long, suspended moment of collective disbelief. The kind of silence that falls when an audience realizes that the story they thought they were watching is not the story that was actually happening. Then several people started speaking at once. Daniel's face had gone completely blank. Whatever expression he had been wearing all evening, the performance of confident superiority, was simply gone, replaced by something that looked a great deal like the specific fear of a person who has just realized they fundamentally misjudged something very important. Victoria released Sabrina. She stepped back. She stood quietly, and then the doors opened. 3 people entered carrying legal documents in folders. Behind them came 2 individuals with a presentation system that they connected to the venue's screen system with calm efficiency. Within moments, the large screens that had been displaying charity event information were showing something else entirely. Financial records, account structures, transaction histories, transfer documents with specific dates and specific amounts and specific signatures. Every hidden account, every fraudulent transfer, every forged authorization, every asset that had been moved, repositioned, or renamed in the months-long attempt to strip Victoria out of the company she had helped build. Displayed publicly, in full, for every person in that room to see. Daniel made a sound that was not quite a word. "This," said the attorney leading the presentation team, addressing the room with the composed authority of someone who had prepared for this moment with great care, "represents a comprehensive record of fraudulent asset concealment and corporate theft. These materials have already been submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies. Additional copies have been delivered to 3 separate media organizations this evening. The legal process has already begun." The room erupted, not with applause, with the chaotic noise of an audience that has suddenly understood it is watching something real. Daniel turned to Sabrina. His expression was desperate, reaching for the alliance he thought he had secured. What he found on Sabrina's face was not what he expected. She was not looking at him with support. She was looking at her phone, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone whose own private calculation has just collapsed. Because what the investigators had uncovered during their months of work had not stopped at Daniel's financial misconduct. The deeper records showed something else entirely. Sabrina had not simply fallen for Daniel. She had been positioned near him deliberately. She had been feeding detailed information about the company's strategic plans, its contract negotiations, and its vulnerabilities to a business rival who had been attempting to acquire access to their most valuable intellectual property for several years. She had used Daniel, manipulated his ego, turned his attraction to her into a tool for extracting precisely the kind of insider information that would otherwise have taken years and significant resources to obtain. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for had been running her own operation the entire time. She had never wanted him. She had wanted what he could unknowingly hand over. When this was displayed on the screens, clearly sourced, clearly documented, the silence that followed was different from the earlier silence. This was the silence of a room watching a man realize that his entire performance of the last year, every act of cruelty, every public humiliation, every arrogant decision, had been executed in service of someone who had never seen him as anything more than a useful access point. Daniel looked at Sabrina. "Is that true?" he asked. His voice was so stripped of its earlier confidence that several people near him looked away out of something that might have been pity. Sabrina said nothing. "Sabrina." His voice cracked. "Is that true?" She picked up her competition bag from the edge of the mat. She looked at him once with an expression that contained no warmth, no regret, and no particular interest in whatever he was feeling. And then she walked out. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by people he had spent a year performing his dominance for. The legal documents on the screens, the financial evidence, the entire architecture of his betrayal laid bare in a venue full of the exact people whose respect he had been most desperate to cultivate. He turned to Victoria, and something extraordinary happened to his face. All of the arrogance, all of the contempt, all of the dismissiveness that had accumulated across years of believing he had outgrown her simply fell away. What was left underneath was something much older. Something that looked almost like the man he had been before success convinced him he had no further use for the person who had helped make it possible. "Victoria," he said. His voice was quiet now. The performance was finished. "Please." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm genuinely sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I lost myself. He stopped, swallowed. "I got so caught up in feeling like I had to prove something that I forgot everything that actually mattered. I'm sorry for all of it. For what I said to you. For how I treated you. For the money. For bringing her into our lives. I'm sorry." The room was still. Every person in it was watching Victoria. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I know you are." He exhaled. Something shifted in his posture. Hope, perhaps. "But Daniel," she continued, her voice still steady, still calm, still carrying that particular quality of a person who has done their preparing long before this moment arrived. "The fact that you're sorry now in this room, surrounded by consequences, doesn't undo what you chose when you thought there were none." He closed his eyes. "I need you to understand something," she said. "Not because I want to punish you, but because it matters. What you did was not an accident. It was a long series of choices. Every transfer, every forged signature, every time you looked at me and chose cruelty over decency. Those were all choices you made freely. Being sorry when the cost arrives is not the same as having been a person worth trusting when it didn't." He nodded. Once, he could not look at her. There was one more thing. Victoria's attorney stepped forward and addressed the room briefly. He explained that several months earlier, after Victoria had first discovered the financial irregularities and begun her investigation, she had quietly engaged a separate legal team to conduct a comprehensive review of the company's ownership structure. What that review confirmed was something Daniel had never known, because he had never taken the time to understand the full architecture of what they had built together. Victoria had, years earlier and entirely legally, established holding structures that maintained her primary ownership over the company's most valuable assets. The flagship intellectual property, the highest revenue divisions, the contracts with the most significant long-term value. These structures had been established before Daniel even had the level of access he would have needed to understand them. He had spent months trying to steal from a company where the most important parts had always legally belonged to her. The empire he thought he was taking had never been his to take. The company he thought he had built was built on a foundation he had never fully understood. Every powerful thing he had tried to strip away from her had remained in her hands the entire time. Not because she had anticipated his betrayal specifically, but because she had always understood that what she built deserved protection. And she had been thorough enough in the beginning to make sure that protection was in place. What followed in the weeks after that evening was rapid and, to those who had watched the events unfold, entirely predictable. Daniel's legal situation moved forward through the appropriate channels with the kind of momentum that well-documented fraud cases generate when the evidence is clean and the legal team is excellent. His public reputation, which had been so central to his sense of identity, dismantled with a speed that reflected how much of it had been constructed on borrowed credibility. Sabrina's situation was its own separate consequence. The business rival who had used her as an information source distanced himself immediately when the documentation became public. The martial arts community, which operates on specific values around honor and integrity, responded to the revelations about her conduct with a coldness that was thorough and lasting. The medals and the titles remained technically on her record, but the rooms that had once opened for her began quietly closing. The allies who had attached themselves to Daniel during his apparent ascendancy discovered what people who build their loyalty on the appearance of power always eventually discover. That appearance is not a reliable foundation. Victoria moved forward, not in the dramatic way of someone who has triumphed and wants the world to see them celebrating. In the quieter, more durable way of a person who has removed something heavy from around their neck and can now simply breathe normally again. She restructured the company under her full and clear ownership. She rebuilt the team around people whose loyalty she could verify and whose capabilities she respected. She returned to some of the work she had stepped back from. Not the military contracts, not that specific world, but the instruction, the mentorship, the work of helping people develop the kind of internal discipline that no external circumstance can easily unmake. She thought often during that period about the things she had taught for years before any of this happened. About the relationship between patience and power. About how the most dangerous capability a person can carry is the one that is invisible until it's needed. About how the real work of strength is not in the demonstration of it, but in the long, unglamorous, consistent accumulation of it when nobody is watching. The retired commander reached out to her a few days after the event. He sent a single message. "I'm glad you're still the person I remember." She replied, "I almost wasn't, but the training holds." He sent back one word. "Always." There is a specific kind of person who looks at a woman who has been publicly humiliated and sees only a target. They see the dress, the composure, the careful exterior. They interpret stillness as emptiness. They interpret patience as weakness. They interpret the choice not to react as an inability to do so. This is a fundamental error, because stillness is not emptiness. It is discipline with nowhere urgent to be yet. Patience is not weakness. It is the decision to choose the right moment rather than the nearest one. And the choice not to react is sometimes the most powerful move available. Victoria Hale had spent years teaching those lessons to people who needed to internalize them under extreme pressure. And then life had required her to live them herself under the most personal kind of pressure there is. She had not been perfect through it. There were nights during those months of investigation when the grief of what Daniel had become, and the anger at what he had tried to do, and the loneliness of carrying a secret that large while still functioning professionally and socially, had been almost unbearable. She had cried. She had doubted. She had sat alone in rooms and felt the full weight of what it means to discover that the person you built a life with had been looking for the exit long before he told you. But she had also remembered something she used to say to the operators she trained, on the days when they were pushed past the point where they thought they had anything left. "You are not at the end," she would tell them. "You are in the hardest part. Those are not the same thing." She had held on to that, and it had been true. This story holds several things worth carrying. It holds the reminder that the person who underestimates you is not doing you a kindness, but they are giving you something valuable. The element of surprise. The decision to let people believe what they need to believe while you continue doing what actually needs to be done is not passivity. It is strategy. It holds the reminder that patience is not the absence of power. It is power in its most concentrated form. The ability to wait for the right moment rather than the emotionally satisfying one separates people who win from people who simply react. It holds the reminder that what you build genuinely, with real labor and real intelligence and real integrity, is not easily taken from you. Because the depth of real work leaves traces that fraud cannot fully replicate or fully erase. And it holds a quieter reminder that the people who hurt us most are often fighting battles inside themselves that they are losing before they ever bring that war to our door. Daniel's betrayal was not about Victoria's inadequacy. It was about his own terror of being insufficient. His own inability to sit with gratitude without needing to convert it into ownership. His own collapse under the pressure of becoming someone he did not know how to sustain. Understanding that did not make what he did acceptable, but it made it legible. And legibility sometimes is the beginning of release. Victoria did not spend the rest of her life defined by that night. She spent it building the next version of what she was capable of. And she did it with the specific freedom of someone who has looked directly at the worst a situation can offer and discovered that they are still standing on the other side. The fight lasted 30 seconds. The preparation had taken a lifetime. And the life she built afterward was the whole point. Thank you so much for staying until the very end of this story. It means more than you know. If the story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you of something important, we would love to hear which part stayed with you the most. Drop it in the comments below. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. There are more stories coming that carry this same level of depth, emotion, and truth. Hit the subscribe button, leave a like if this story was worth your time, and we will see you in the next one.